Hello everyone. On behalf of ICAR, Indian Institute of Soil and Water Conservation, I welcome you all to this lecture series, the topic on Socio-economic Impact Assessment of Watershed Programs. Myself, I am Dr. S.M. Vanitha, working as a Senior Scientist in Agricultural Economics in Research Center, Udhagamandalam, Nilgiris, Tamil Nadu. Now coming to what is impact evaluation and why impact assessment is really required. Impact evaluation is evaluation designed to identify and measure the consequences resulting from a program or project or policy intervention. In our case, it is a watershed program or a project. And why impact assessment is actually required? It is required because it exhibits accountability of the system. Donors also seek evidence on impact as a basis for future financial support. And it also helps in decision-making process and allocating resources efficiently and setting the research priorities. Now coming to Watershed Impact Assessment Framework. Any watershed development project or program is implemented based on certain objectives. The main objective would be like conserving the natural resources like soil and water, at the same time achieving the maximum output in terms of crop production or crop productivity of that area. And each watershed objectives will vary based on certain factors like the amount of rainfall, slope percentage, soil type, etc. And these factors vary across different regions. Hence, the watershed development objectives would be different across different regions. So, based on these objectives, there are certain watershed development activities which will be taken up under these projects or programs. And these watershed development activities are classified as institutional building activities, watershed treatment activities, and capacity building programs. Coming to watershed treatment activities, it is the combination of different agronomic measures, mechanical measures, and watershed structures. Like we have soil and water conservation measures, drainage line treatments, water resource development or water harvesting structures, afforestation, etc. Based on these activities, we ultimately increase the area under irrigation under the project or the watershed, and also increase the crop production or productivity, increase in employment opportunities, and ultimately leading to the improvement in the farmers' household welfare and livelihood. Similarly, we have environmental benefits that are coming out due to the result of implementation of watershed activities, like improvement in the groundwater recharge, reduction in the runoff and soil loss, and improvement in the vegetation cover, ultimately leading to expansion in output and improvement in farmers' welfare and livelihood. Now, before going to the actual impact assessment methodology, let us know certain terminologies that we frequently use in impact assessment studies, like output, outcome, and impact. Outputs are the immediate project results, like, for example, knowledge generation, the technology that is developed from the project or the product that is developed, improvement in the crop productivity or crop production, the policy recommendations or policy implications. These are few examples of output which are immediate project results that is coming out from the project. Whereas outcomes are the output that we get from the project after a period of time. For example, it is technology adoption or the product adoption of the product that has been developed from the project. The initial impacts are also called as outcomes. Institutional development, like local institutions that are developed or empowered, and ultimately the improvement in the income and livelihood of the stakeholders. Coming to impact, there are three categories of impacts that we study, that is social impact, economic impact, and environmental impact. Coming to three major categories of impact assessment. Firstly, it is ex ante assessment. This is done for priority assessment and to justify future funding. This ex ante impact assessment studies are taken up before the commencement of any watershed development project or program. Coming to the second type, that is ex post assessment. This is taken up to account for past funding, and it is usually done or taken up after the implementation of the watershed project or program has been completed. And coming to the third category, that is concurrent evaluation. This is taken up to correct the gaps, and it is studied during the process of the implementation of any watershed project or program in order to correct the gaps and in order to improvise the implementation process and do certain corrections, and based on the impact study results we are going to fill the gaps and do some corrections in any implementation, in further implementation of the watershed project or program. Coming to different levels of impact assessment. Firstly, we have farm level impact. Here we consider the indicators such as yield, income, employment, household food security, risks involved, natural resources conserved, gender, welfare of the farmers, etc. Coming to regional or national or sector level impact, here we consider the indicators such as performance of the sector, production, prices, employment, trade, natural resources, poverty, disparity, etc. Coming to economy level impact or national level impact, here we consider the indicators such as performance of the economy, national income, national savings, national food security, etc. Now coming to two broad approaches that we use in any impact assessment study. Firstly, before or after the technology. Here we can have the data that is before implementation of the watershed, that we also call it as baseline survey data, and after the implementation of the watershed is completed, and comparing between before and after the watershed of different indicators we come up with the impact. And similarly, wherever there is no baseline survey data available, we can go with the second approach, that is with or without. So with is in the watershed development area or watershed beneficiaries where we can collect the data, and the area where watershed interventions have not been collected, like nearby area where the control can be selected and the data can be collected, and we can compare with watershed and without watershed data, and we can come up with the impact. Now coming to know about data collection methods and methods of sampling, which is very important in any impact assessment study. Now coming to data is as such not useful when it is raw form and it has not been analyzed. In order to get a meaningful interpretation or information from the data has to be analyzed and interpreted. Now coming to the four scales that we use for data collection, that is nominal scale, where for example name of the farmer, name of the district, name of the watershed comes under nominal scale of data. Ordinal scale, for example, we have scores, ranks that is being given for certain variables, and those kind of data are called ordinal scale data. And interval data are the difference between two time periods. That type of data we have interval data. And ratio scale is the data that is excluding nominal, ordinal and interval data, and rest of the data comes under the ratio scale. Now coming to quantitative versus qualitative data. Quantitative data is the data that we can quantify, whereas qualitative data can only be scored or ranked. For example, good, bad, high, low, medium, these types of data are called qualitative data. Now coming to time series, cross-sectional and panel data. Time series data is the data that we collect across the period of time, whereas cross-sectional data is the data that we collect across different regions or different places. And panel data is the combination of both time series and cross-sectional data. Now coming to what is primary data and secondary data. The data that is collected directly from the interviewing or from the directly with the data which is collected from the stakeholders, that type of data is called primary data. And data that is collected based on certain published sources like journal papers, research articles, review papers, or the data that we take from the government websites, these kind of data are called secondary data. Now coming to different methods of data collection. We can collect data from experimental sites, for example, lab experiments, farm experiments, etc. And we can also collect data through PRA, that is participatory rural appraisal techniques. We can also have the data collection through personal interviews, through FGDs or IGDs. FGD is focus group discussions, IGD is interest group discussions. We can also collect data using questionnaires, telephonic conversations, and digital platforms like Google Forms, etc. Now coming to different methods of sampling. Here are certain methods of sampling that are listed here. For example, first one is simple random sampling. In our case, since we are assessing the impact of a watershed, we can select a watershed where we can have the watershed beneficiaries, and without following any procedure, randomly we can pick up the watershed beneficiaries and we can collect the data randomly by using simple random sampling method. Secondly, stratified sampling. For example, I have to study a watershed impact assessment in Tamil Nadu state. So I will go and classify different watersheds and select watersheds from each district, representing each district. So it is first the Tamil Nadu state, then different districts in the Tamil Nadu, and how many watersheds have been implemented in different districts, and further I select the beneficiaries of each watershed. And this sampling framework has now divided into different stratas. So this method is called as stratified sampling. Now coming to third, that is cluster sampling. For example, if a watershed has equal number of beneficiaries involving male and female, and I want a true representation of sample between both the genders, I classify male beneficiaries as one cluster, female beneficiaries as another cluster, and sample can be taken from both the clusters. This is an example of cluster sampling. Now coming to the fourth method of sampling, that is purposive sampling. Suppose I have a specific kind of study where I want to analyze the impact from groundwater recharge structures. So I am going to collect the data from the beneficiaries who are directly benefited from groundwater recharge. So I am going to collect the data from them. So it is purposive sampling, that is sampling done with a purpose. Then lastly, it is snowball sampling. Here I don't have any reference towards any watershed beneficiaries, so I approach the watershed implementing agency. In our earlier example, the example of the Tamil Nadu watershed impact assessment study, where we can approach the Tamil Nadu state government in order to give the watershed beneficiary list, and taking the reference from the state department, we can select the beneficiaries for collecting the data. This method we can call it as snowball sampling. So these are different methods of sampling that we follow in any impact assessment study. There are different steps in impact assessment. Firstly, selection of technology for impact assessment. In this case, it is Watershed. And secondly, it is identify target domain and assessment of adoption. In our case, target domain will be Watershed beneficiaries, and assessment of adoption of soil and water conservation measures or watershed interventions that are taken up in the watershed. We have to analyze the adoption of those interventions by the farmers. And thirdly, define indicators for impact assessment. Like what kind of indicators should be collected or finalized for analyzing the impact. And fourthly, we need to select appropriate methodology for analyzing the data and completing the impact assessment study. And lastly, we have data sources. As we were discussing earlier, should we collect the data from the primary sources, secondary sources, or what kind of sampling method has to be done, and what type of analysis tools can be adopted has to be finalized before we analyze the impact assessment data. Now we can quickly go through some examples of simple impact indicators that we can use in any impact assessment of watershed project or programs. For example, improved cropping intensity, equity, that is benefit sharing and access to resources, additional employment generation, additional farm and non-farm income, extent of cultivation of wasteland that is brought under cultivation, income from different sources, availability of fodder or grazing lands, permanent improvement on the farm like farm mechanization, fencing, etc., improvement in farm assets and non-farm assets, improvement in technology adoption in agriculture, access to different markets for better prices of farm produce, access to better market information, sustainability of watershed treatments, poverty alleviation, an estimation of groundwater recharge, estimation of spillovers due to watershed development benefits outside the watershed. So these are certain indicators that we can select and analyze for any impact assessment study. Now this graph shows the time lag. For example, here we can say like y-axis being the annual cost or the gross annual benefits, and x-axis is our timeline. For example, from 0 till this point, there is no benefit that is coming out from this curve. So this part we call it as R&D or R&D lag, that is time lag that we are referring to. And the benefit starts from the implementations of the watershed stage to completion of the watershed stage, and after completion it slowly yield certain benefits, and the benefits from the watershed increases over the period of time, that is over the adoption time, and it reaches the maximum where we have adoption ceiling, and slowly the benefits from the watershed diminishes over the period of time. This graph shows the time lag that happens during the implementation of any watershed program or project. Due to the time lag that we witnessed in the previous graph, the time value of money needs to be considered in any impact assessment study. This time value of money is considered by using these two formulas. Firstly, future value of present money is being calculated by using this formula, where F is future value of the present sum invested, P is the principal amount invested, and I is the interest rate in percentage, and T represents the number of years. And coming to the second type, that is present value of future money. Here we have PV representing present value of the future returns, P is the money value in future, I is the interest rate in percentage, and T represents number of years. Now coming to different methodologies that are used for impact assessment. Firstly, discounted and undiscounted methods measures returns to investment. For example, NPV, that is net present value, DCR, benefit cost ratio, IRR, internal rate of return, and PBP, that is payback period. Then coming to next method is econometric method, where we measure marginal productivity, for example cost functions, production functions, total factor productivity. And thirdly, programming method, where we measure optimization of technology, for example linear programming. Then lastly, surplus method measures aggregate social benefit, for example we can use economic surplus model. Now in this lecture, let us know only about the discounted and undiscounted measures. Here we can calculate net present value using this formula. It is nothing but the incremental net benefits or incremental cash flow stream. It can be calculated by finding the difference between the present worth of the benefit stream less the present worth of the cost stream. And also we can have like benefit cost ratio, that is the ratio obtained when the present worth of the benefit stream is divided by the present worth of the cost stream. And payback period can also be calculated, which is the period when the cost of the project is repaid. And IRR is calculated based on this formula. It is nothing but the discount rate that makes the net present value or worth of the incremental net benefit stream or incremental cash flow equal to 0. It is the maximum interest that a project could pay for the resources used to cover its investment and operating costs, and still break-even can be achieved. It is the rate of return on investment that is made, which we call it as internal rate of return. Thanks for watching, and for more details you can contact me at this email ID.